talk will discuss the great range of edible biodiversity that can be grown in this climate and reviving production of resilient sources of foods, medicines, and materials in an agroforestry setting that contributes to the restoring of the planet while mitigating climate change. This presentation will showcase pictures of his adventures of fruit and nut trees throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. And this talk will cover local efforts to share that material out again with the world. Chris is the founder of the Agrarian Sharing Network, a board member of the Home Orchard Society, and he also runs an edible-focused nursery called Head, Hands, Heart. And with that, let's welcome Chris to Science Pub this evening.
Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me okay? All right, and it's okay over there? Okay, well, my name's Chris Mannix, and I appreciate you guys coming out and for the talk. And we've been trying to figure out, Maggie and I have been trying to figure out this like method to convey when to change the slides. So I think instead of me going like this or like this, so I'll just kind of, well, if I go like this, that means the slide would change. So if I keep doing it repetitively, something weird isn't happening with me. Okay, so anyway, one of the concepts that I've been trying to promote with my nursery in the name is to promote whole human beings, and that involves a couple different facets. One of them is creating human beings that are using all their faculties, that are working together with their head, hands, and heart in unison. Right now, you know, on the internet, people are fighting at their chair with other people at their chair somewhere else in the world about various things, and there are people every day toiling away, either pushing paper, using their mind, or toiling away with their hands. And I think that if we can bring all of our faculties together and have them work together, we can, each of us can add our little heap of sand on the scale and tip things to a better future. So primarily, when it comes down to it, we are biochemical beings, and we are affected by our outer environment and our inner environment. Our outer environment are the people that we're surrounded by, where we live, pollution, all those kind of things. Those factors are harder to change, but we can impact the biochemistry that we get inside of our inner environment, our diet. And so I'm going to be talking about diversity of plants that can be grown in Willamette Valley over the course of the talk. And so human beings, I believe that human beings aren't intrinsically good or intrinsically bad, that a lot of what we do is based on stimulus. And so we have the ability through self-awareness to either increase or decrease ecological diversity, the number of niches that an environment has. So part of the picture, trees are the answer. So I believe that our society needs to embrace trees and a sort of an arboriculture. I haven't really come up with a better word than that yet. It's kind of a clunky word. But if we were to adopt a tree-based society, a society that revered trees, revered forests, they are a tool as that we could use in our society to promote a concept of timescales that are beyond just a single lifetime, an intergenerational timescale. Trees help us remind us that we live in a continuum of a geologic timescale in millions of years and a cosmologic timescale in billions of years. So many of our supply line needs can actually be met locally in gardens, farms, and underutilized spaces. And a big component of that could be tree crops. Tree crops tend to outperform annuals year to year in terms of production and also nutritional density, in particular micronutrients. Tree crops also help reverse ecological degradation and climate destruction by sequestering carbon, by building and maintaining soils that usually become more mineral dense if they're treated correctly in agroforestry settings. Those are like agricultural forests, basically. And they also hold water in the landscape. And the more we can normalize the landscape throughout the seasons, the more ecological niches that those forest ecosystems are going to provide for more organisms to survive. So this is a mural up in Portland. So some of the crops I work with, I do a lot of edible plant research and seed work and plant development work. One of the crops I work with are potatoes. This was a recent event that my friend Amy Garrett and I did for the Dry Farming Collaborative event that we did with Slow Food Corvallis. So I breed different types of potatoes, and I'm focusing on nutrition and flavor. I've also been breeding perennial kale, reselecting perennial kale for more hardiness. These are kales that you don't have to plant every year, that they grow into a bush form and survive for many years. Another crop that I've been working with, these are just a few, I don't have much time to spend on it, but is high carotene, high protein corn. My initial interest was actually to create a chicken feed that I could use to raise baby chickens, but it also, from the get-go, I realized the high food quality of this particular corn, and so I've been breeding it for edibility as well. It actually already makes really wonderful tortillas, but the goal is to have a corn that looks like those fake orange corn, those orange candy corn or whatever. Anyway, so corn can get that orange. And when it does, that means that it has a very, very high carotenoid content. And carotenoids are very important in the human diet. So that's something I'm interested in. So kind of beginning the discussion, a couple years back with my friend Nick Rutledge, we morphed the Lane County Propagation Fair into the Agrarian Sharing Network. We wanted the event to be more neighborhood focused and more fine-tuned to rural areas or urban areas where we held events. We wanted to focus it around potluck and bring it back down to a smaller scale. And so we're going into year 4. This year we held events throughout Western Washington and Western Oregon and one in Western Washington. There was an event which one of the key organizers here, Marjorie, was involved in. Hi, Marjorie. And so anyway, if you're interested, we'll be having an event here in Cottage Grove again this year. The plant propagation fairs involve hundreds of varieties of different selected fruit and seed swap. So I will be talking a lot about plants, but ultimately it's about people. And like I was saying, creating a whole, in pursuit of the whole human. This really comes back to, this is a people-centric movement. This was in Ashland, Oregon earlier this year, where I was grafting trees for different people. And this is kind of a typical scene of the season. This year we had a walk-in cooler and 4 refrigerators full of Scion. The Scion was then divvied up and distributed to all the groups. And then, as was the rootstock up in the corner. And these are just some supplies they use to graft trees. So each year we've put a little money aside, and I've gone on a biodiversity collection trip. The first 2 years I went to Washington, and I brought a lot of targeted material to Washington that I thought would work well in Washington. And I received a bunch of targeted material back that we put in the fairs, and I also propagated locally to keep going in a local collection. And this last season, I actually turned the biodiversity wagon south, and I headed down to California and brought targeted material down to California, and received and brought back a bunch of unique material to trial up here. And these were two different places I went. I went to go visit my friend Rachel, who is the curator of the Burbank Garden in Santa Rosa. She's been a big collaborator over the last couple years. And I also met a new ally, Freddie Menge, who has been breeding new red-fleshed apples and long-hanging, long-storing apples in the Santa Cruz area. He's a second-generation orchardist. We're blessed in this area to not only be able to grow a ton of different types of fruit and plants, but we also have some really large collections of biodiversity. And one of them is actually was the largest apple collection in the world, 4,500 varieties. Nick Botner's apple orchard in Yoncalla, Oregon. He also has one of the largest vineyards in the world as well, about 600 varieties. And so I've been going through here for the last, I think, 6 years, systematically going through all the rows, during season collecting fruit, and out of season collecting scion of the targeted varieties to distribute through the propagation fairs and other nursery people around the country. And this is my good buddy that helps me out with it, Elsie. She really likes the game Where's Your Ball? All day long, all day. Not stopping, nothing, I don't care. She gets super muddy, and thankfully Carla Botner, Nick Botner's wife, is happy about that, sort of. Anyway. So I'm going to start on some of the fruit. I've got to go over a quick overview on all this stuff. This is part of like a bigger talk that I do, but I only have 45 minutes. So so I was talking about there's a lot of different big apple orchards in Oregon, some really nice collections. And one of them is my friend Joe Burkhart's orchard called the Antique Apple Orchard, which is near Sweet Home, Oregon. And this is actually his apple press, which is like I think it was an 1820s one-cylinder engine that he has a crank, and he eventually has to start a little fire in the combustion area, and then cranks it and gets the motor going, and then he uses that to press and grind cider. It's super cool. I've got a sense about what I like and what I don't like in terms of different types of fruit and nuts and stuff like that. But we like to do taste testing events where around the Willamette Valley, where we bring community in, and they're often done kind of small. Often there are farmer events, and we come around, potluck, eat, and sample fruit. And that helps me gain an understanding of what other people like, and that leads into what we collect in the winter. In the last couple years, I haven't done as many of these events because I've been so busy. But this year, I also attended the first annual 2019 Heritage Orchard Conference, which was in Sandpoint, Idaho, at the University of Idaho. And they have an orchard here, about 120, 150 varieties. And I got to meet orchard people digging around and looking for fruit and old orchards from everywhere from Montana and Wyoming and Colorado, Oregon and Washington, and a little bit of California. So it was really interesting how us all come together and find common goals, also get access to a genetic fingerprinting operation that's happening out of the USDA and Washington State University. And it's going, I feel like this conference is going to be a real big boon to genetically identify a lot of apples that are in people's homesteads and stuff like that going forward. So after the event, some of you may have been reading in an article about apple explorers in the Pacific Northwest, and it's an article about my friends Joni Cooper and Sean Shepard and my friend David Benscotter. David Benscotter was a retired FBI agent who decided to go exploring around the hills and looking at apples. And so after the event, he took us up to Steptoe Butte, which is outside of Spokane, Washington. And there's two interesting things about Steptoe Butte. The first is that this is the Palouse area, and it actually has the best remaining prairie of anywhere in the Palouse. And it has the remains of two different homesteaders which competed to plant as many apple varieties and plum varieties that they could. So the whole Steptoe Butte, everywhere where there's moisture, are apples and plums. And most of them are not seedlings. They're actually grafted varieties. So something like over 10 varieties have been rediscovered out of here. But walking around, huge different fruit diversity. Excuse me. So going back to Nick Botner, Nick has such a wide collection of apples, and these are just a few that I really like. Turley wine sap is an older form of wine sap. It's got better flavor than the wine saps we usually see around. Cellar Sweet and Sumatuka and Frog are all long-storing varieties, and that's something I'm really interested in finding the varieties that can store to February, March, April, May. And Frog is actually a variety that comes from an apple explorer named Tom Bunker out of Maine. And he had found this apple tree that was about 300 years old, which is not that common out in Maine. And the apple tree was all hollowed out. And for several seasons when you go there to get fruit and try to figure out what it was, there was this loud in the tree, and it was a frog. And so they never did figure out what the tree is, but, you know, that's how names happen. So the tree got named Frog, and people are like, why would I want to eat an apple named Frog? Well, it tastes really good. Next slide. This apple I call a fruit punch. It's apple that I found about 1.5 miles from my house. I'm always looking at different apples, and I'm always looking at different fruit trees and nuts and stuff like that. And most of it's crap, but you know, as you're sifting through, just like you're fishing and you're pulling up tires and eels, or you know, like sharks and seaweed and stuff, eventually you get a fish, right? So this fish was this big, so to speak. Anyway, so it has a flavor of fruit punch. You can't really describe what fruit it is. Different fruit notes wash over your tongue. It's got a wonderful melting crunch, and it's just dripping juice. So I've been grafting up a lot of these trees. I think it's going to be a great fresh eating variety, and it's actually become one of my top 20 varieties. And I know it's kind of like the mother-child syndrome, you know? So the idea like, you know, every child is the best child in the whole world kind of thing. But I really think this does have merit and stands alone, or stands by itself, I should say, as a fresh eating apple and as a cider apple. So another thing I'm really into are red flesh apples, and I've been able to graft about 50 or 60 of them. These are just a few of my favorites. All these varieties are at Nick Botner's and some other places. Next slide. This apple, so every year at the Home Orchard Society event, the All About Fruit Show that happens at Clackamas Fairgrounds, there's a bunch of folks that sit at the ID table, and people bring a lot of fruit that moves across the table. And last year, a woman brought a fruit buy that she found in the St. John area of Portland. And this was actually the heaviest, densest apple that I'd ever seen. This apple weighed almost 1.5 pounds, and it was so dense that you actually could not bite into it. You have to cut it first. And it's one of 4 fruit trees that are right along this old rail line. And so all we know is that this particular park was called Chimney Park, I think it is. And all we know is that park used to be a farm, but we don't know. We haven't been able to find out any other information about this fruit or the pear that's there. So, like I said, I love red flesh apples. They kind of have a strange texture, like they are kind of pulpy and stuff, but the flavor is like biting into like just berries. Like it's kind of hard to describe what kind of berries, but it's a total berry note. Smell of rose petals. They're quite intoxicating to eat. It's called giant red Russian crab, and the story about that's kind of obscure. I don't know if it's a seedling of this one progenitor red flesh apple called Niedzweckiana or not. I don't really know, but it's one of the best actually that we can grow here. It is a great cider apple too. Apples can also be orange fleshed or yellow fleshed. This is what's called Malus prunosa, or the prune-leafed apple. Next slide. And so when the prune-leafed apple, or when prunifolia and baccata, which is another crab apple, get crossed with regular fresh-eating apples, it can add some really complex flavors and textures to the apple. And this is actually one of my top 20 apples, Centennial. Some of you may be growing it or have seen a tree. It's one of the earlier ripening trees, and it's got an indescribable rich flavor. They're kind of bite-sized. You can put the whole thing in your mouth and chew it up. It's just a wonderful apple. It's a crab, yeah. So Malus extosoniana is a hybrid with our native crab apple and regular eating apple. There are a bunch of different forms around Washington, Oregon, California. Nobody's doing anything with them. This form was found by my friend Rick Valley, who does a lot of explorations of the natural world himself. And we were able to collect scion of it because the tree was destroyed. So, and that's often what happens, if you don't get in there in time and collect something that's worthwhile, it could be chainsawed down, or it could die because of drought, or an oak could fall on it and knock it over. So there's just this is all like very the notion of impermanence is very much on my mind all the time. So lastly, I'm really interested in long hanging apples. This is Howard Pippin, which was once a commercial apple in California. It's totally worth planting here. If you had a Howard Pippin tree, you would still be able to pick fresh apples off the tree, and they usually will go up here even with all the frost and everything. They usually hang on the tree till early January, which is one thing I think about. We rush to get all the harvest in, but there are certain vegetables and fruit trees and what have you that can hold their fruit on the tree. So it's nice to have a delayed harvest. It's like nice to have really early stuff, mid-season stuff, and late stuff. This is another long hanger. This is a seedling of Granny Smith, and this is the parent of the common pink lady apple. But this is called Lady Williams. Lady Williams will easily hang on the tree till early February in California, and I don't know of any trees being grown up here other than ones I grafted, so I'm keen to see if that will happen here too. So last, my favorite class of apples besides red flesh apples are the russet apples. I don't know if anybody here I'm sure some people have had russet apples, and russet apples have certain notes that you don't find in any other apple. And some of them are awfully ugly apples. Like, people don't want to eat them. They can be like loby and weird, but the flavor is amazing. So kind of changing focus to pears. Pears are another favorite of mine. This is Copenhagen Nursery. So like I said, we're blessed to have some really large collections of biodiversity in the Willamette Valley. And one of them is the pear repository at the USDA. They have about 2,200 accessions, which means that they've collected from all over the world. About 1,400 of them are cultivars. And so I've been going through this collection for the last number of years and looked at the collection in up to 7 different ripening windows from mid-July to late November finding which are the best early ones and which are the best late ones, etc. Of the Asian pears, the European pears, and the hybrid pears. So the very first early pear that is worth anything and will last more than a day is Clementinka or Mustafabe. This is ripe anywhere from middle July to late July, sometimes late August. But this pear will last about 2 or 3 weeks, which is pretty impressive for any kind of summer pear. I didn't put many in this slide here, but I'm also a big fan of the buttery pears, which are in France are called Bure, or in Italian are called Buttiera. And so Buttiera di Roma is a very early pear that doesn't last long, but it has a wonderful milting flavor. It would be a good canning pear. So if somebody was asked, like, what would your favorite class of pears be, I would definitely say Asian pears. Some people don't like them, but I really love them. These are just a collection of my few favorites. I just will highlight Zhao Shu Li, which is an old Chinese cultivar. It's a hybrid pear between European pears and Asian pears. And it will last into March. So there are a few pears that will do that. And this one ripens around January, and it just holds forever. So pears can hybridize with themselves, but they can also hybridize with a plant called the white beam, which is Sorbus aurea. And there are both natural and cultivated forms of these types of what are called Sorbopyrus. The most common one that we see is Shipova, but there are other forms. These are two other forms, Smockvarka and Basu. Basu is a tree that was found in Hungary that has since, it's been around apparently from ancient times, but it's been grafted over and over again. And the area around Basu is just apparently filled up with these trees. These kind of trees have, or these kind of fruits, they have kind of like a buttery pear flavor, but they're like mild and creamy in a different way that any other pear would be. So we can have red flesh apples, we can have red fleshed pears. And not a lot of research has been done into red flesh pears in the United States, but I think that it's worth experimenting. You'll see my hand holding a lot of things. It just, so when you're in a field, you know, like, well, how am I going to take the picture? Well, I've got one hand to take a picture and my other hand to hold the thing. So it's just kind of like a slideshow of hands. On the left, yeah, I'll get into that. On the left-hand side is my friend Joseph Postman. He took several different varieties of pears. This is Summer Bloodbeeren, which has an okay flavor, but it has a really small ripening window. It will ripen, and then within 2 or 3 days, it's kaput. And so this was an open pollinated seedling. I think it has promise. He didn't like it in the end, but there's a lot more that are going to be fruiting this year likely. So it'll be interesting to see what some of the new developments he's done at the USDA. And on the right is a hybrid pear from Italy called Bassiera, and I found that in my friend Cliff England's orchard in Kentucky. And as for the what causes, it's a gene that causes the intensification of a compound called pelargonin, I think it is, which is an antioxidant. So plums, I love plums. Plums are one of my favorite fruit. But when I was going through to make this slideshow, I realized that apparently I just eat the plums. I don't take pictures of them. So I don't have many pictures. But these are two of my favorites. On the left, Methley plum, which is one of the earliest plums. It's a Meroblin hybrid. And on the right is a Japanese plum, so-called Japanese plum, or complex hybrid plum, called Shiro. It's a common homestead plum. And in the center is actually a crab apple called Dogo. So two plums, though, that have caught my eye, or actually caught my camera's eye. How about that? are this Willamette prune plum. And at the prune stage, where it would be good to make prunes, it hangs in this color of kind of like a yellow, green, blue coloration. It will eventually ripen to blue, but it's past by the time it does that. I found this tree 2 or 3 different times in different places in the valley. I suspect it was a prune variety at one time, but I don't know which one. Nick Botner actually has about 15 different accessions of prune plums, and it's not in his collection, and none of my plum buddies know what it is. But on the right is an ancestor of many of the European cultivated plums. It's called the sloe plum, and which you can make into a liqueur. Sloe plum is normally not very healthy in this area, but this tree growing on the OSU campus is actually doing well. Grapes. So on the left is a poster by my friend Ken Love, and if you want to see some really cool fruit posters, or if you need some in your house, check out his site. He's got like posters of avocados and bananas and exotic fruits. They're really cool to look at. On the right, we also do fruit tastings, and so this was a tasting that was done over at Two Rivers Farm in the Mohawk region near Springfield. Go ahead, Maggie. Thanks. I've been collecting apples out of Nick Botner's collection, but I've also been collecting grapes, and it's a bit more of an urgency to collect the grapes out of his collection. 1, because nobody's done it, and 2, because his grapes are kind of crashing. They're just getting old, and they have not been pruned correctly, or sometimes they've been pruned too hard and stuff like that. There's no major cane diseases in his orchard, or any that I can tell. And I've had a couple grape experts look at them, but they're still kind of crashing. And he's now 94, so his time isn't long. So he's been happy to know that I've been propagating out all these grapes. So I have like hundreds and hundreds of pictures of grapes. And they're these kind of like crappy plate photographs where I just go down at a tasting and take a picture. But these are 3 of my favorites. The blue grapes are, that blue kind of, and that high pectin trait comes from the grape called Labrusca grape. And that's kind of my favorite type grapes, the Concord type grapes. But these are 4 of my favorites. The one on the bottom is probably one of my all-time favorites, New York Muscat, which there's actually a trait to describe flavor of grapes. There's a whole bunch of different traits, and there's one particular flavor called Foxy. And this has a lot of foxiness. And on the top is another favorite, Buffalo Red Sport, which is a very vigorous grape that has excellent flavor. And on the right-hand side is a Labrusca type grape that I found at the homestead of this man named Ryby, who worked at cataloging ship manifest for Hudson Bay Trading Company at Fort Vancouver. And he developed his homestead in the 1820s. And I found this grape on the edge of a naturalized chestnut and maple forest. And the grape sprawls around and covers about an acre. And there's so many blackberries and brush and stuff. I don't even know where the main trunk of this grape is, because it just like pops up in different places over about an acre. So I'm going to go back and try to find out where that is, and I'm also going to clone this one. Speaking about vines, kiwi. So there are a lot of different hardy kiwi that we can grow, and the USDA actually has the largest hardy kiwi collection in the world in Corvallis. So I've been going through that collection and looking at which kiwi I like the most. And probably one of my favorites is that 211B, which is a hybrid, I think, of Actinidia arguta, which you see like 2 different types on top, and that orange one, Actinidia polygamma. I suspect, based on the shape of it and the flavor, that they're a hybrid between the 2. But it is so mild. One issue with the hardy kiwi is that they're high in oxalic acid. so they can really like burn your throat or be kind of anti-nutritive if you eat a lot of them unprocessed. But this one is like no oxalic acid at all, and it's got a really nice berry fruity note that I don't detect in any of the other hardy kiwi. So they can also be red-fleshed, and so these are just two that I found that are superior. Most of the red flash ones are really high in oxalic acid, and even if you eat several fruit, they'll burn the back of your throat. But these are two that are lower in oxalic acid. And one of the interesting things is this 106479 is actually the darkest red in the collection, and I think it'd be worthwhile to breed with this one, because to build antioxidants in our food should be a goal. So not only can we grow hardy kiwi, but we can also grow Actinidia chinensis. And this looks like the store-bought kiwi, but it's actually a different species. Chinensis ripen a little bit earlier than Deliciosa. And the cool thing about Deliciosa and Chinensis is that both of them can be harvested and stored in a cold area and taken out over time. And so you can have a continuous wave of kiwi for like a 6-month period if you wanted. So this is a picture of just some different fruits, and I'm gonna kind of change the course a little bit and talk about a whole different variety of fruits that I've come in contact with in this area. So there are a lot of different types of sorbus. Sorbus are related to pears. They're one of the rose family fruits, tree fruits. And a lot of them are usually acrid and are just awful. Like, trust me, you wouldn't want to eat it. And a number of them are made in juices, like in Europe and stuff like that. But some of them can be eaten outright. And this is one of them. This is from Northeast China. And I think that of all the sorbus I've ever tried, it's one of my favorite ones. The only tree I know about is at the Washington Park Herbarium, or Washington Park Arboretum in Seattle. But the other problem with sorbus is that they don't graft very easy. You have to graft them onto typically seedlings of the same species. So, and this one doesn't create seed, which is another problem. So I don't know how to get it out of the arboretum. But so a kiwi is pretty fun. I found out that from my friend from Okinawa that while you can eat the gel inside. It kind of has like a mild gel flavor. It's actually better to scoop it out and fry the peel. And he's like, oh, yeah, we don't even eat the inside. You just like scoop it out and throw it away, and he's like, fry the peel. And I was like, no way. And he fried the peel for me, and it was actually pretty good. Another relative of that same family is an understory tree called blue bean, Decasia fargesii. This is from northern China, and it actually has a lot of anti-cancer properties, and particularly in its roots. But there's this thing called programmed cell death biochemistry, and those are involved with chemotherapy drugs. And there was a paper online. I haven't been able to find it. I've looked for it again and again because I was writing a paper about this, but. About 15 years ago, there was a paper in which Indian scientists and Chinese scientists got together and they researched this plant, and they found that it was active against 30 different types of cancer and a wide range of cancers. So I think that this should play a role in cancer research in the future. And it's also pretty cool because they're like these long purple pods that, and in Chinese, they're called dead man's fingers. And they ripen right at Halloween, so it's great to put them out on the table during Halloween time because kids are like, "Whoa, what is that?" So I've been collecting huckleberries, black huckleberries, from around the Pacific Northwest, and I'm working with the USDA on this project, and they want to do some breeding with them. I have a couple different hybrid forms with a species from here and the species from Chile called Chilean blueberry, and they actually freely hybridize. This particular one right here is the heaviest bearing huckleberry that I have in my collection, and it's got very showy flowers as well. It grows in the full shade, like underneath evergreen trees. Um, this is a fruit, non-fruit. It is in the Cascara family, or the same family as like jujube, and it's called raisin tree. Um, and you actually, in this case, you don't eat, the fruit is like a little hard ball, and behind that are the fruit attachment points. And when it ripens, it will actually ripen where those swollen kind of forked things are actually what you eat, and they taste like dried raisins. And there's actually 3 different types of long chain sugars which stimulate the immune system that have only been found in this plant, and it's also high in biochemistry that's associated with things that we normally can't eat but are actually very healthy for us. So like woody products, we can't digest woody products, but there are some important biochemicals in them. And so this plant is actually provides that biochemistry, allows us, to put that in our diet. And then those other berries were like a strawberry relative. So looking around, there's special stuff everywhere. And this was actually a hybrid dewberry, Himalayan blackberry hybrid that I found at a previous place where I lived. And I've cultivated that, and it has a beautiful kind of marionberry, wineberry flavor. So I've been propagating a lot of that. I'm gonna plant some rows of that. Next slide. This is that plant I showed you before. That's probably where a plant similar to what I showed you before crossed back to a Himalayan blackberry. And this one has berries that are really, really large, but they have some of that trailing dewberry flavor to them. So it's on my friend's driveway. I'm going to go back and clone it this winter. In this citrus family, we can grow these types of, a couple different types of like Japanese pepper and Szechuan pepper. They're not actually real peppers, but they do have a peppery flavor. There are actually compounds in this plant which trick your taste buds into believing that it's tasting salt and sweet and spicy and savory all at the same time. And it's actually been used in research to rebuild people's nervous systems that have been damaged. And it's also good in stir fry. There's that strawberry tree. Who got that right? All right. Yeah, so Ericaceae family. But anyway, yeah, so strawberry tree. Before apples were in Ireland and Scotland, people made applesauce from this. And I think that's probably its best role. It's a really late season fruit. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people find it's too mealy for them. But I really enjoy it. And cooked down, it makes a really nice applesauce. So this is blue passion flower. This particular clone was a clone that's been floating around Eugene for decades. I've been involved with several people around the country hybridizing different types of passion flowers with our passion flowers from the East Coast, the Passiflora incarnata, which is fully frost hardy, to basically make fruits that taste better and can actually survive frost in this climate readily. So this is pineapple guava. This is actually in the myrtle family, or the pineapple guava family. And not only is it a beautiful ornamental, but it produces a really wonderful fruit. And those white petals right there can actually be eaten. They taste like cotton candy. And there's the fruit right there. It is, it's a close enough replica to guava. It definitely does have a pineapple note. Fully hardy here. They grow really well. It is an evergreen plant, so you can grow it as like kind of a hedge. This is actually a rare shrub that exists only in a few places in Oregon, but I've been cultivating these to try to bring them back. Calycanthus is called Western sweet shrub, and every part of the plant is extremely aromatic. It's not actually a food plant, but I do work with some edibles and some things that aren't edible in my nursery. So mayapple. For the last 3 years, I've been collecting mayapple from people around the country. Mayapple is actually related to the Oregon grape, but you wouldn't believe it, but it's in the same family, the Berbedaceae family. And the whole thing is intensely poisonous, but the pulp inside of that fruit when it's edible, when it's ripe, and the pulp inside of the fruit has the has a I don't even know how to describe it other than it's like a totally wild tropical flavor, like in your face, like I don't know, some kind of like it's almost like it's like fake, you know? It's so good. You're just like, whoa. Oh, and the other cool thing about this is that it's a natural source of a chemotherapy drug. And so, you know, I think that going forward, we're going to need to integrate more anti-cancer foods into our diet to be able to survive, you know, the way that we're headed with polluting the planet. And then there's pawpaws. I love pawpaws. I really should have taken more pawpaw pictures, but I haven't. But I don't know if anybody here has had a pawpaw, but they taste like man in the back. So pawpaws taste like bananas, but they have tropical notes. They're wonderful. Some people don't like them. Some people did not like them. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, but they like, it's like custard in a fruit. And it's the only fruit that we can grow that, in my opinion, that is really like a tropical fruit. Mulberries. There are tons of different mulberries, and I don't know why, but there are not that many mulberry trees around. And mulberries, you wouldn't think of them as like a fruit that you could sell in a store or ship or anything like that. But having a mulberry tree in your backyard, as long as it's not on a walkway, is a real asset, because they're so delicious, and mulberries are high in protein, high in minerals and vitamins. So this is a mulberry relative. It's called che. It's another plant that the smaller fruited forms of che we can definitely grow in this climate, but nobody's doing it. Che kind of has a notes of light mulberry, light notes of fig, and kind of like a juicy watermelon type red juice. Some people think they taste like watermelon. They kind of do, but they're kind of like their own thing. I really enjoy them. They're mild, but they're really nice in the summer when you're hot because they cool you down. Persimmons. That was a persimmon orchard out in Indiana. We also don't see we see like a lot of Fuyu and Haichia Asian persimmon around, but we don't see a lot of American persimmons, and it's kind of too bad because there are really good superior forms of American persimmons, and that's kind of one of the things I'm really focused on collecting, are as many different varieties of big fruited, low astringency, splatter-proof American persimmons. And so this is Pennsbury persimmon, which is one of those American persimmons that are really ideal. Pennsbury is the estate of William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania. This persimmon is the state champion in Pennsylvania. It's 160 feet tall. And these persimmons are almost as large as an Asian persimmon. When they fall to the ground, they don't splatter. They hang on the tree a long time, so you can actually pick them off the tree when ripe. And they have an excellent flavor. And the calyx, you can actually pull the calyx out and pull the seeds out, so they could be like dried into American persimmon hasagaki, which is dried persimmon basically. And when I was back in Indiana, that orchard picture I showed you, this was one of the better forms, and that were selected by Donald Compton, who is a lifelong persimmon breeder. Donald, I don't know why, but he's trying to find this like some kind of like ultimate perfect American persimmon, and he has 4 of them that are so close. So he calls them wannabe 1, 2, 3, and 4. And all of us have said, Donald, you're like selling yourself short, man. Wannabe is actually like, it shouldn't be called wannabe. Like it stands on its own. It's actually really good. So what we did was there's a group of us that went out to Indiana and went to his orchard and a couple other persimmon orchards, and we collected about 150 pounds of fruit, processed down the seed, and so we're all several of us across the country are going to grow out several thousand persimmon trees from this very best American persimmon stock. American persimmons can also be hybridized with Asian persimmons, and I think this is kind of like the next wave of persimmon breeding. One of the values in American persimmons is that they have a lot of flavor notes that you don't find in Asian persimmon, and so you can combine traits together in new ways. It's great. There are some hybrid ones around, like the Nikita's Gift or Nikitaskaya Bordova or Rusiyenka, but there's a whole wave of new ones that nobody's really working with. That's a variety. That previous picture was a variety of called Cassandra, which was a complex hybrid between Asian and American persimmons. So trees have other uses. So in that question, I talked about the trivia question. I talked about little leaf linden. Little leaf linden is a wonderful green that you can eat off a tree, which is pretty amazing. And you've got about if you grow these, you've got about a 3-month window. They're very coppicable, and they really do have the texture fairly close to lettuce, with maybe like a tiny little hint of lime. I don't know why we don't grow them, other than people don't know about them. So trees can also provide fodder for animals. These are a couple different ideal forms of honey locust. We often see black locust trees around, but honey locust doesn't have some of the toxic properties that black locust has, and the plant has very palatable forage, and the pods are also high protein, high sugar, so they can be. I mean, we don't really need more sugar sources in the Pacific Northwest. I think we got that on lockdown. But in terms of fodder, this is also a perennial bean crop, though it's kind of hard to extract the beans. Some people are working on trying to figure that out. And trees can also provide lots of medicine or long-term rot-resistant wood. Osage orange provides both. Osage orange, actually the pulp of the fruit is a potent anti-cancer medicine, and the seeds inside can actually be roasted like sunflower seeds, and the wood can be made into posts. And there were trees in Coburg, Oregon, and I met an old timer that actually had a building that has on the floor, just like down in Texas, his floorboards were actually this Osage orange, and we're still around after like having sit on the ground for like 100-something years in Oregon. Bamboo, we don't think of bamboo as a tree, but it is the tree form of grass. Bamboo has something like 15,000 plus uses. Many species, but not all, of the shoots are edible. Bamboo can also be fed a lot of waste resources. So you can turn a lot of like slaughter waste or something out of a bad factory farm situation. You kind of clean up that waste with bamboo. Willow. So a couple of years ago, I went around the Pacific Northwest and I collected a bunch of different forms of willow. And so now I have this big willow collection going. I was focusing on basketry forms of different colors. And this is my friend Mario De Veneta over at Peace Seedlings, which is near Corvallis, where he and his partner have been making all these kind of cool woven willow structures. So they call their place Willow Way, and it's quite a sight. This was actually 2 years ago. Now it's like these walls of all these brightly colored willow. All right, figs. And actually, what was sad was that I was like, I got to get my. I don't know how it happened, but like that insect landed on my hand, and I was like, what the heck is going on? So, and then another one landed on my hand, and I was like, no way. And I was just watching it for 5 minutes, and I was like, all right, I'll take a picture of it. And my phone was over there, and I went to go grab it, and one of them, of course, flew off. But I was still like amazed that I was able to take a picture of this dragonfly that was sitting on my hand. Figs are everywhere. Everywhere you go, there are figs. A lot of them are the same, but if you pay a keen eye and try to identify figs, there's a good chance you're going to come across one-of-a-kind figs, because there are so many different cultures that associate with figs that have come to the United States. And actually, if you go back, sorry, on the left, that's just a pretty common fig. This was a series of old trees in a mall in Bellevue, Washington, outside of Seattle. And on the right is the original Olympian fig, which is a brown turkey type. Next slide. This is actually the largest fig that I know about in Oregon that I've personally seen. It's about 45 feet tall. And it's actually behind the Riverbend Hospital in Springfield. It is a white Marseille type. And there's a picture of its fruits. Here's a fig that I received from my friend called Yellow Longneck, and on the right is a fig that is in Springfield on the edge of this giant shipping industrial park area. And I couldn't get to any of the really good figs, and I don't know exactly what variety it is, but it's kind of a boxy fig that they ripen to jet black. Next slide. Woodburn, Oregon, because of the nurseryman that founded Oregon, Settlemyer, he brought in a whole bunch of different types of figs. And so I found several different types of figs there. I think that this one is, it's got an English name. I can't think of it at the moment. Go ahead, next slide. So some things for the future. Up in the right-hand corner is white zapote, which is in the citrus family. White zapote tastes kind of like a pleasantly chewy, rich caramel, buttery pear. And zapotes actually have pretty good cold tolerance. And I think there are probably some zapote forms from the mountains of like Michoacan and stuff like that that can survive in either a mildly heated greenhouse or even maybe an unheated greenhouse. On the bottom left and bottom right are two different types of hardy mountain papayas. Hardy mountain papayas, when hybridized, I'm pretty sure are going to be a future crop for this area. And there are some that have pretty close to regular papaya flavors. And then in the upper left-hand corner is another plant in the guava family, the Myrtaceae family. They're called the lily pillies. And there are a bunch of these different types of fruits. Some of them, like this one right here, they have magenta-colored flesh and really interesting, complex flavors. And then I've been collecting dragon fruit as well, trying to find the most hardy ones. Walnuts. These are heart nuts. Next slide. Walnuts can get really big. This is a paradox walnut, which is a hybrid between English walnut and black walnut. This is at the Jason E. Lee Mission State Park. Next slide. This is a walnut fossil that I found in a old riverbed formation outside of Coburg. That walnut is fossilized, and it is actually still hollow. It's very light, but it is completely stone. I don't want to crack it open. It's just too cool, you know? It probably has crystals inside. Next. So we have a lot of different types of English walnuts in this area. These are a couple different forms that are large. This form, the lower left-hand corner, is a form from my friend Paul Atkinson. It's a very large walnut. There's a couple, and then there are some really easy shell forms. This one, Fall City Homestead, can be shelled with your palms, super easy. It's small, but it's very easy to crack out. Next slide. Here's just a heart nut form. Heart nuts are probably the most reliable walnut we can grow in the area. While they are small, they are very easy to crack out, good forms of them. Next slide. So heart nuts, the ones I showed you earlier, can actually hybridize with these types of, with butternuts, which look a lot like this, and create these things called butter hearts or buart nuts. Next slide. This is a related species. Next slide. What I've found out here is that we have a lot of different types of hybridized walnuts, hybridized black walnuts, and most of them are garbage. And I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of trees, and I found only about 5 worth grafting. So what I've been doing is I've been collecting, been getting my friends to send me the seed and scion of the best varieties from the East Coast to graft and grow out here. And here are some of the best forms that I've seen. Like the Yellowwood Giant, and the Lancaster one is from this guy, John Hershey, who's a nurseryman. And the one in the lower left-hand corner, the Rain Tree Tropicals, there was a guy in Silverton that about 130 years ago, I think it was, he bought some seed from the East Coast because he wanted to sell black walnuts of the best he could get. And he paid, at the time, it was something like he paid $5 a seed or something like that. But anyway, 2 of the trees are actually 2 of the best walnut trees I've ever seen out here in Oregon. Next. And a very good black walnut, you can actually crack out and pull the meat out like that. That's what it looks like. Next slide. Black walnuts can actually hybridize with the buart nuts. This is what's called a black buart nut or black butter heart. It actually, it's really weird shaped, but it cracks out really easy like a heart nut. Next slide. So here's just a couple examples of hybrid paradox walnuts that have, the one on the left is a heart nut crossed with English walnut, and the ones on the right are black walnut crossed with English walnut. Next. Hickories. So we can grow a ton of different hickories out here, but people really haven't done it, and most of the hickory trees that are out here aren't very good. So here's just a couple forms of shellbark and shagbark hickories. Bousseron is a French cultivar, a northern cultivar, a pecan. And then pecans and hickories can cross together to form hecons, which you see down in the right-hand corner. Hecons can sometimes retain the thinner shell of the pecan, but some of the complex flavor of the hickory, and be easy to shell out. Next. This is actually one of the biggest hecons I've ever seen. It's called McAllister. And there's no reason why we couldn't be planting these things all over the United States. They have a pecan thin shell, but they're really big. You can see how few hold in my hand. And the flavor on them it's almost like, it's like a nuttier form of a pecan. So this is a bitter nut. Bitter nut is actually, it can be 60% oil by volume. It is extremely bitter in this form, but if you have an oil press, you can press it out into very fine salad oil. And when you hybridize pecan and that previous nut, you can get a bitcon. And bitcon actually gets rid of all the tannin, but retains all the oil. And this is actually the best nut that I've ever had anywhere in the tropics or temperate region. And I'm grafting them, so I'm going to be planting a lot of these. Hazelnuts. These are just a couple forms in the USDA that I really like. Up in the corner is a huge variety of hazelnut called Jimmet Guard. And then there was a guy Frank Gelatli, who in British Columbia developed complex hybrid hazelnuts over 100 years ago. And this is one of his better varieties, Normoka. And then below is a variety from an old plant breeder about 100 years ago in Vancouver called Fitzgerald. And on the right-hand corner, this shows kind of its more oak heritage. They're actually closely related to oak and chestnut. And so it has a more oak, this is a hazelnut that has a more oak-shaped nut. And it actually has, it's small and fiddly, but it actually has a delicious high oil flavor to it. And all these are blight resistant. Next. Oaks. Next. Tan oaks. Tan oaks are one of our finest flavored oaks that we can grow in the area. Native plant. They're very easy to grow from seed, and they start producing really early. Bur oaks. Bur oaks are there are some really large forms of bur oaks. They're easy to grow, and they also come pretty easy. They start seeding pretty soon, relatively speaking, for oak, within 15 years usually. Next. I'm just going to speed through the last. Chestnuts. So we have some really large chestnuts in the area. This is the Lexington American chestnut in Portland. Next. This is an American or European American hybrid. A couple pairs in the Oddfellows Cemetery in Tumwater. Next. This is one of the largest chestnut trees I've seen. It's actually kind of a crappy chestnut. There are a lot of chestnuts that, especially the old ones, that are poor. And this is one of them, but it's still a super cool tree because it's so huge. Next. This is, I'm actually selling some back there, but this was the first true American trees that I found after looking at over 1,000 chestnuts in Washington, Oregon. And this is actually a pear that grows near Salem. That's actually in isolation. So I've been growing up pure American chestnut trees. Next. This is a complex hybrid also from Tumwater area of Washington, outside of Olympia. Very good flavor. Next. Shadow Mountain Ranch. These folks, they planted chestnut trees from all around the area at their place, and they have about 700 trees there. So I've been going through and looking at all the chestnuts in the rows and trying to figure out the best ones to graft. Next. These are just a couple forms. A couple more forms. The form on the left I call Tiger Eye. It is super shiny and very, very striped early on. And then this is one that I call T-post because it grew into a T-post. Sometimes you just have to have working names, so when you go back later, you know, oh, it's the tree that's 3 down from the T-post or by the rusted car or whatever. Next. So Settlemyer, I mentioned earlier about the figs. He planted a huge number of different types of trees. There are a number of chestnut trees there. This particular one was at his home, and somebody that was part of this organization, Friends of Settlemyer or something like that, there was a chestnut that had been like sprayed and mowed down, and somebody tried to bulldoze it, and the thing kept surviving. And so finally, this guy, he was like, oh man, this poor tree. And he picked it up out of there because it was like so resilient and moved it over to his area of the median and grew it, and actually ended up being, actually he planted in the backyard for like 8 years and decided to move it again, which is super bad for chestnuts. They don't normally like that. But this one has thrived from all of that. But anyway, this is actually a really good Chinese, European, American complex hybrid chestnut. So sometimes when you start hybridizing different species, weird things happen. This chestnut has 7 different nuts in its burr. Next. These are just a couple forms of some of the best trees I've found. There's chestnut forests in Mapleton that are pretty interesting. There's a forest outside of Lacey, Washington, called the Witten chestnuts, which are the highest quality nuts that I've ever found of any chestnut out here. And then a couple other ones. Next. So there's a species related to the American, but it's very short, bushy chestnut called the chinkapin. And this is a chinkapin hybrid that I found in Renton, Washington, outside of Seattle. And the burrs are typically, it produces a single nut per burr, but it produces like clusters of like 60 or so burrs. Just like it's drooping in burrs. So I've been growing out these seedlings because I think it'd be a good pollinizer for orchards. Next. And then these are just some like imported chestnuts I got from Uwajimaya. And this shows you how big chestnuts can be. So an old relative that we have that's endemic to the Northwest, that's kind of related to the live oaks and kind of related to chestnuts, is golden chinkapin, Chrysolepis chrysophylla. And there really aren't that many trees. The forestry, DNR and stuff like that, when they find the trees, they typically cut them out of the forests. But these nuts, next, they taste a lot like macadamia nuts. Actually, they're rich and they're wonderful. I think that we should grow them more, even if they are fiddly. And then here's another relative. The mushroom shiitake was supposedly, the story about shiitake, it was supposedly found on a shi tree. And the shi tree, Castanopsis, is another chestnut relative. I actually bought these nuts from a company, and they were all bad. But I decided to take a picture of them. I still want to grow them eventually when I can get good nuts. Next. And then ginkgo, we don't think about ginkgo. Ginkgo can be smelly. It can kind of smell like poop and stuff like that. But when you process them, ginkgo have a lot of beneficial nutritional properties for your nervous system and your brain. And these are just two larger fruited forms from Illinois. For whatever reason, in Nauvoo, Indiana, or Illinois, which is where a lot of Mormons moved to, for some reason they collected tons of different types of ginkgo, and it's actually now like a world center for ginkgo diversity. And my friend for the last 40 years has been going around and tracking the best trees. So he started sending me nuts from the best trees to grow. And then lastly, monkey puzzle. I didn't put any slides of pine, but I did put this in. These are actually really low in oil, but they're very high in carbohydrates, like a chestnut, and they actually ripen usually about a month before chestnuts. They take about 20 years to bear, but in terms of like a chestnut-like crop, they could actually extend the harvest of chestnuts for another month. And then, any questions or comments? I think I know I ran over, but thanks for listening. So she asked about a bunch of trees in Portland with spiny husks and whether or not they're horse chestnuts. Some of them are. And learning what a horse chestnut is and what a chestnut is important. It's kind of beyond the scope. But if you look up horse chestnut, you'll see a bunch of diagrams that compare the two. One thing is the horse chestnuts tend to be really big and round, and chestnuts tend to have more of a point on their nut. They also, their burr will be a lot of spines, where the horse chestnut burr is less spiny. Anybody else? Quick question about persimmons. Can you harvest a persimmon fruit after frosts? Yes, and actually, frosts actually blet the fruit, which means that it's like a pre-stage to rotting. So I know it sounds bad, but it basically what happens when something's bletted, it breaks down the tissue and allows the tannins to release from the fruit. So typically, there are some persimmon varieties that you have to wait and harvest post-frost. And there's a question over there. Yeah, all the nuts are edible. I didn't sneak any horse chestnut pictures in there, I promise. Yeah, the acorns. So all acorns are edible. It's just a matter of processing tannins out. Some are not worth processing the tannins out. Some are higher in protein than others. So actually acorns, it's like free food everywhere. And I don't understand why people, we should, as a society, collect all the acorn nuts and process them communally. They make great flour. I don't know if anybody here has ever had acorn biscuits, but they're really delicious. Acorn is high in protein, high in oil, and good carbohydrate source. Yeah, the jays and squirrels. One more question.
So how do you handle all the insects that want to get into your nut trees?
How do you handle all the insects that want to get in your nut trees? Well, you plant resistant varieties, and so that's kind of what I've been looking at, are walnut husk resistant walnuts and chestnut, or we don't have chestnut weevil, thankfully, but there is the hazelnut weevil, and there are certain varieties that are more resistant than others. Anyway, thanks guys, appreciate it.